So I recently posted the following on Minds.com in response to an article from the Irish Times that weddings with 100 guests highly unlikely to be allowed this summer. So I said, the social distancing restrictions and level of control of personal autonomy and freedoms, as well as the re-engineering of society itself, actually fit very well within the Agenda 21-2030 Sustainable Development Goals strategy. SDG have always been a pathway to global communism. Governments now know that many people in the West are surprisingly easy to control when significant fear is instilled in them over a prolonged period of time. Governments can now determine how far people can travel from their home. They can determine what social activities, jobs, and businesses are essential. They can close pubs, restaurants, and other public spaces. They can forcibly break up groups over a certain size. They can specify the number of people permitted in your private residence or even the maximum number of guests at your wedding. Will society also simply acquiesce to the invasiveness of contact tracing and tracking apps, as well as mandatory testing? And finally, will they submit to mandatory vaccinations or else suffer social ostracization and marginalization? If people have already accepted the precedent of removal of all their other rights and freedoms, on what grounds can they refuse the loss of their bodily sovereignty? I believe we're in the midst of a serious cultural change here. The populace at large now no longer believe their freedoms are inalienable, but instead see them as little more than concessions granted to them by the state. So, welcome to an entirely different world, at least for now, until people wake up. And I want to talk about the World Economic Forum and what they refer to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the groundwork of which has been laid through the Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 projects, and they're now referred to as the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. In this video, I will simply be presenting you a collection of articles and videos showing you a general trend of where the world appears to be going, and I think you'll begin to see some patterns emerge. First things first, this article is from the World Economic Forum from 2016. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. Except, of course, for the technocrats who designed such a communist utopia. They're the ones who will no doubt have all the privacy, wealth, and property they want. Freedom and liberty are no longer for the proles, it appears. This article sounds like a parody. Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. Imagine thinking you could actually frame this in a positive way. I don't own any appliances or any clothes. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense for us in this city. It sounds like a prison. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. As to how this is paid for, who knows? One by one, all these things became free. So it ended up not making sense for us to own much. First, communication became digitized and free to everyone. Then, when clean energy became free, things started to move quickly. Transportation dropped dramatically in price. It made no sense for us to own cars anymore because we could call a driverless vehicle or a flying car in 2030. Flying cars in 2030. For longer journeys within minutes, we started transporting ourselves in a much more organized and coordinated way when public transport became easier, quicker, and more convenient than the car. Now, I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams, not to mention the air pollution from combustion engines. What were we thinking? Though our world has never been perfect, it at least worked and once actually valued meritocracy. For those who wish to build a perfect world, a utopia, they always inevitably create a dystopia. The road to hell and to communism is always paved with good intentions. Sometimes I use my bike when I go to see some of my friends. I enjoy the exercise and the ride. It kind of gets the soul to come along on the journey. Funny how some things never seem to lose their excitement. Walking, biking, cooking, drawing, and growing plants. It makes perfect sense and reminds us of how our culture emerged out of a close relationship with nature. Environmental problems seem far away. In our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we do not need it. Right, so someone is in your home, which you don't actually have a home, when you're not there. Happy with that level of no privacy? My living room is used for business meetings when I'm not there. It's hard to take this article seriously. It sounds more like a parody written by a naive teenage socialist. If you can't own your own home and private ownership is a thing of the past, then you're at the mercy of state-enforced collectivism. To bring about such a world would require significant top-down control and totalitarianism. Once in a while, I will choose to cook for myself. It is easy. The necessary kitchen equipment is delivered at my door within minutes. Since transport became free, we stopped having all those things stuffed into our home. Why keep a pasta maker and a crepe cooker crammed into our cupboards? We can just order them when we need them. This also made the breakthrough of the circular economy easier. When products are turned into services, no one has an interest in things with a short lifespan. Everything is designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability. The materials are flowing more quickly in our economy and can be transformed to new products pretty easily. Environmental problems seem far away. Since we only use clean energy and clean production methods, the air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare to touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value to our well-being. So in other words, you don't have freedom of movement. In the cities, we have plenty of green space and plants and trees all over. But what if you want to go to the rural areas? Apparently you're not allowed to actually go where you want now. I still do not understand why in the past we filled all free spots in the city with concrete. And everything is perfect all day long, everywhere, right? Every day. And no one goes hungry. And we all live in a Star Trek-style imaginary wonder planet of infinite resources and rainbows and kittens, right? But it's the last part of that paragraph I want to focus on. One of the plans for the Agenda 21-2030 Sustainable Development Goals project is that the masses will be huddled together in smart cities and people will gradually be forced to move away from rural areas into these cities through a series of carrot and stick policies. Smart cities are essentially hellish, futuristic urban prisons for the destitute masses to live in, surveilled, controlled and tracked through a big brother artificial intelligence that employs a China-style social credit system, zero freedom and a cashless society so that all financial transactions are monitored. Internet of Everything will be ubiquitous and so you'll be connected, or should I say shackled, to this technocracy whether you like it or not. Those who refuse to conform will be marginalized to the fringes and left to endure a kind of virtual gulag, cut off from the rest of society and unable to access basic services which the oligarchs will control. When these same elites create these propaganda videos with nice-sounding buzzwords like smart solutions, integrity, innovation, sustainability, sustainable growth, environmentalism, clean energy, equality, equity, blah, 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 they're always referring to planetary resources that everyone needs: food, water, nature, healthcare, money, electricity, agriculture, industry. And so their plan becomes obvious for anyone who can read between the lines. Their intention is to control all of these things, to control the means of production and all of life's essentials, everything a human being needs to live. Once they control all of these things, they can force you into any kind of world that they wish to create and essentially turn you into a serf. So the bit about the air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare to touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value to our well-being. In the cities, we have plenty of green space and plants and trees all over. This is important because what they're telling you here is that people will not be able to travel where they want to rural areas, down the country kind of thing. You'll have to live in a smart city. So there'll be great restrictions on your movement. You won't be permitted to venture out to the natural environment. Your self-driving car simply will not permit you to go there. You'll be able to commute between cities and urban areas, but not into the countryside. That privilege will be reserved for the uber-rich technocrats who will enjoy luxury mega homes in beautiful, unspoiled and idyllic remote locations surrounded by nature. They'll have it all for themselves. Now, the environmentalists who support this kind of stuff, they argue that depopulation of rural areas is an important part of restoring biodiversity and preserving the environment. Basically, most people will live in these kind of AI-controlled metropolitan super city menageries like cattle. Already we can see the manifestations of Agenda 21 in terms of how countries are changing property planning and zoning. This article is from stovuno.org. Agenda 21 and how it plays out. New Zealand is in the process of introducing a raft of measures to implement Agenda 21 by undermining traditional private property rights. These include legislation to enable the control or requisition of private land for the purposes of rewilding or for urban development. Here is some background to Agenda 21 and a look at the American experience, particularly with regard to the way the concept of biodiversity is used to negate property rights. Major goals of Agenda 21 include the abolition of private property, the demise of rural living, exclusion of humans from wild areas, the abolition of single-family homes, government control of food supply, mandatory birth population control. Like all similar UN documents, Agenda 21 is full of positive values that nobody seriously disagrees with in principle, such as care of the environment and adequate housing for all. Like similar documents, Agenda 21 assumes the anthropogenic global warming narrative as a non-negotiable premise, assumes biodiversity as having a value that supersedes human rights, asks for greater roles for the UN and the corporate-owned NGOs. The two planks of environmentalism, climate and biodiversity are used to justify interference in the lives of people that can only be described as totalitarian. Likewise, the current pandemic crisis we're going through is being used to force new social controls on people and take away their individual, inalienable liberties and freedoms, all introduced by the same kinds of organizations, the United Nations, for example. COVID-19 is essentially an accelerant for the Agenda 21 2030 plans. The Agenda 21 encapsulates and refines the policies of the UN bureaucracy as developed and flagged over several decades, such as those relating to private land ownership. According to the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements 1976 Habitat 1 official report, land, because of its unique nature and the crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth and therefore contributes to social injustice. If unchecked, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Under the Vancouver Declaration, the section of the official report of Habitat 1 that was available for formal signature, states commit themselves to the following position. Land is one of the fundamental elements in human settlements. Every state has the right to take the necessary steps to maintain under public control the use, possession, disposal, and reservation of land. Every state has the right to plan and regulate use of land, which is one of its most important resources, in such a way that the growth of population centres, both urban and rural, are based on a comprehensive land use plan. In Agenda 21, this becomes 15.5i, develop policies to encourage the conservation of biodiversity and the sustainable use of biological and genetic resources on private lands. It is clear from the way Agenda 21 is being implemented that encourage means compulsion through legislation, taxation, and local authority zoning. So this is why it can be harder for people to get mortgages in certain rural areas of their country. For example, they're doing this here in Ireland as well. The United Nations view of private property is that the state has the right and should be exercising this right to take land for environmental reasons in order to fulfill an environmental agenda. This is in conflict with the culture of countries like New Zealand, which assumes that universal private home ownership is the best way to achieve equal opportunity, security, and happiness for all, and thus private property rights should only be interfered with for the purpose of essential public works such as motorways. Agenda 21 was theoretically succeeded by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, but both Agenda 2030 and especially 21 have largely been abandoned by the United Nations and its proponents because of the negative connotations and replaced with terms like sustainability and resilience. Thus, while the EU produced a progress report in 1997 termed Agenda 21, the first 5 years, it now refers to sustainable development in the European Union. The US experienced Agenda 21 and the Wildlands Project. The Wildlands Project proposes that 50% of American territory be wilderness reserves, largely no-go for humans, bloody hell, surrounded by buffer areas and joined by wilderness corridors with human beings largely confined to urban areas, smart cities. Publicity of the scope of the project led to the US Senate failing to ratify the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Meanwhile, back in town, it is not just farmers and rural dwellings that are affected by Agenda 21 policies. The UN strategy for high-density urbanization and reduced property rights is playing out in towns and cities as well. In 2005, the Supreme Court, Kalo versus New London decision, allowed a Connecticut town to seize private property not just for public use, but also for private development, thus paving the way for councils to do deals with developers at the expense of the property rights of homeowners. The Urban Development Bill, currently before the New Zealand Parliament, is similarly designed to legalise the forced acquisition of private property for commercial development. California lawmakers are taking steps to eliminate single-family zoning by enabling all residential lots of properties in California to be legally converted into multiplexes. It is inevitable that standalone dwellings in the state of California will ultimately be a thing of the past. Basically the pod life, it sounds like. The planning department of Carroll County, Maryland, drafted a smart growth plan. They put smart before everything. You know it's a bad idea when they do that. Which proposed what has been termed a breathtaking reshuffling of land rights, and which clearly serves the UN agenda of using biodiversity to eliminate single-family homes with gardens. The plan includes downzoning of agriculture land to prevent future subdivision by farmers, upzoning of low-density residential land around small towns into higher-density zoning to permit construction of hundreds of possibly thousands of inclusive housing units, including apartments and condominiums. And there's been plenty of this going on in Ireland over the past few decades. The building of horrific eyesore apartments and houses with no gardens or front driveways, just shared car parking spaces, endless urban sprawl, basically rabbit hutch towers that look oppressive, to be honest, more like cell blocks than homes. And of course, as I've said, it's much harder to get mortgages in certain rural areas of the country. Anyway, back to this absurd World Economic Forum article. The death of shopping. Shopping. I can't really remember what that is. For most of us, it has been turned into choosing things to use. Sometimes I find this fun, and sometimes I just want the algorithm to do it for me. It knows my taste better than I do by now. Sounds like some people want a machine to do all their thinking for them and to just live as mindless drones. Notice that God and belief in transcendence never factors into any of these utopian ideas, mainly because God liberates humanity from the tyranny of man. That's why communists hate religion so much, especially Christianity, because it places God as the ultimate authority above man. My biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city, those we lost on the way, those who didn't want to live like tracked and tagged cattle, those who decided that it became too much, all this technology, those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs, those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. They live different kind of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stay in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages. Actually sounds not too bad by comparison. Once in a while, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy. Once in a while. Nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere everything I do, think, and dream of is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. All in all, it is a good life. Yeah, because this is an imaginary scenario. In practice, though, it would be as hellish as China is right now. Speaking of China, have you seen this Wall Street Journal video from 2017? It sounds like the blueprint of where they want us to go in the West. In this Chinese city, Xinjiang, there's heavy policing everywhere, like a war zone. Constant government surveillance of the populace, facial recognition, constant police checkpoints. You know, it's basically hell. Everyone is on the system. Everyone is tracked all the time. Every move you make is monitored in this city, and you're checked multiple times per day.
To be in Xinjiang means being checked every day, multiple times a day. When you go to a market, when you drive a car, when you take a train, even your smartphone is checked.
But what I found most striking was what this wine store owner said. He says, "It is really cumbersome. Nobody wants to do anything anymore. The police check my ID so many times, I don't want to do shopping anymore." And that's very interesting because this is how more and more people in the West are starting to feel under social distancing rules. Now, obviously, China is a good deal further down the road, but not much worse at this point. The social distancing, temperature checks, obsessive hand sanitizing, queuing all the time to get into buildings, app tracking, that's all happening more and more in public venues in Western cities. And it makes the prospect of going outside very undesirable indeed. As I've said before, it makes the populace associate being around other people in public settings as a pain, an unpleasant experience, and therefore something that they'd prefer to avoid. This encourages people to stay at home, do their shopping online, speak to people over the internet rather than in person, and become more isolated, cut off, and alone. I don't think anyone can deny that the entire world is now beginning to look and feel much more like China as each day passes. I found this video on Twitter. So basically these guys are spray painting arrows on the ground, just like in grocery stores, that tell you which way you're allowed to walk up and down the road, right? So you can't walk back the way you came kind of thing.
Oh my God. So people, now what happens if I don't walk, and what if I do this? And I will, because this is what I'm going to do. What happens if I do this? What do they do to me? This is I know you guys are doing your job, but this is insanity. This is tyranny. That's what this is. This is communism. Come on. This is communism.
She's absolutely right. This is micromanagement of every aspect of human behavior. They're going after how you walk down the street at this stage.
No, it isn't. I have a double master's in nursing. What kind of health is this? You're gonna get a COVID from walking down the street? This is insane. Look at this. Two people who are together walking with a mask, and they're fine. Thank God this woman has some sanity, no mask on her, and they're fine with what's going on here. Spray painting arrows on the sidewalk in Swampscott, which means that if you are walking in the wrong direction, if you walk... I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen. Take a look. Go to the Swampscott website and find out what happens if you don't walk. It's not these guys' faults. They're just doing their job. But look at this. Look, this is Swampscott. This is where the governor of Massachusetts lives. This is what's going on. This is insanity. This is what's going on. Look at this. This is tyranny. This is communism. This is what the Chinese communist government does to their people, and it's happening right here on the streets in Massachusetts.
Remember the frog in the boiling pot? Slowly but surely, people adapted to the new regime, and because not enough people stood up and called it out at the time, and because some people just said they were just doing their job, it became the new norm. This video is from the South China Morning Post. These children are wearing 1-meter hats to practice social distancing from others. Listen to the light-hearted music. That makes it all the more insidious in my view. By the way, this next article is from the Mirror. Cafe customers must wear pool noodle hats to make sure they socially distance. A German cafe and Konditorei Roth, asked customers to wear hats with pool noodles taped to them to ensure they stick to social distancing measures. But it has divided opinions. Absolute clown world. And this is what it looks like. So this is designed to maintain the 2-meter distancing rule, which, as I've covered in my previous videos, in the long term will actually make people sicker because they're not interacting with other people in a normal way that we evolved to basically transmit necessary good bacteria and viruses to help strengthen our immune systems collectively. This next article is from the Belfast Telegraph. Coronavirus. Pubs in Ireland propose radical changes to secure earlier opening. No live music or DJs. No standing and no dancing. This is the future of Irish pubs. Oh my God, I can't believe what I'm reading. The Irish pub is like one of the greatest social venues that you could go to in the world for the crack and for fun. And this is what we're doing now in a socially distanced world. Oh God, it's so dystopian. The pub experience will be dramatically different according to the new norm, right? The new norm. This is where we have to go now, because apparently the virus that actually is no more fatal than a seasonal influenza, this is what we have to do. The pub experience will be dramatically different according to a new set of social distancing strict guidelines, which may allow for pubs in the Republic to reopen sooner. Industry representatives will urge Dublin officials to allow bars to reopen at the same time as restaurants and cafes, with a series of strict social distancing guidelines in place. Sounds like a pub experience with no fun. Yay! According to the Irish government's roadmap to reopening the country, pubs are to reopen in Phase 5, which would be August 10th at earliest. However, cafes and restaurants will reopen under Phase 3 from June 29th. I wonder how many can actually hang on that long. It's a long time for businesses to try to survive. Pub representatives, Licensed Vintners Association and the Vintners Federation of Ireland have now joined forces to urge the Irish government to put forward pub reopening dates if publicans follow strict measures. The measures are: dispense only bars with no sitting, standing, ordering, payment or drinking at the bar itself. Customers will be seated at tables at all times, with table service provided. No more than 4 people per every 10 square meters. A maximum of 6 people allowed at one table. This is absolute madness. Does anyone else feel like we're living in a mouse laboratory experiment? I think this will utterly destroy the fabric of Dublin's pub scene and the atmosphere that people have always enjoyed when they come to Dublin and go to our pubs. And it will take the joy out of everything, out of communities, social groups, public venues. It'll destroy nightlife. No one will enjoy these kinds of conditions. And I think that's the point. I also think they might be difficult to enforce, given that people will have alcohol on them. Yeah, they're really going to be able to continue to socially distance when they're drunk. We're being asked to live and act in a completely unnatural way. Social distancing is antisocial. It's a sinister attempt to ruin relations between people and divide humanity, wreck cohesion, and further insulate people. Hand sanitizer used before entry, with staff washing hands every half an hour, so they'll kill more bacteria that they need. Outdoor spaces must enhance social distancing, so more onerous rules on human interactions outside. Okay. No live music or DJ, and the safe use of toilets, which may include limits on the number of customers using them at one time. Imagine the queue. Imagine queuing to get into a pub, and then queuing in the pub to get to the toilet all the time, like for no reason other than that there's actually lots of space in the bathroom. It's not even full. It's just they've made it in such a way that you can't get a normal amount of people in there. I cannot find the words. There's nothing that I can say that can really do this justice. It's appalling how we're being treated, and most people are complying out of fear, and fear is ruling the herd mindset. By the way, here's a video from Reuters shared on Twitter. ICYMI. See how lives are changing as countries start to ease restrictions. And look at this. A restaurant with a waitress wearing a mask and a face shield. Is she a waitress or a welder? She's serving the table, and this other female customer is sitting there with what looks like a rather depressed expression on her face. Can you blame her? So everyone, I guess, is going to be separated in this restaurant by plastic screens. There goes the enjoyment of a nice, relaxed dining experience. Hand sanitizer getting on the bus because we're all hypochondriacs now, and apparently, I guess, no one has access to the internet to find out from alternative media sources doing actual journalism that this entire thing is basically a giant scam. Yes, the virus is real, but it's only as fatal as an actual bad seasonal influenza. Just look at these images. This is insane. Everyone is wearing masks, unaware that the masks will actually make them sicker, but whatever. Just go along with the new COVID Sharia. Obviously, restaurants won't be able to survive. They won't have the numbers of customers to turn a profit. So that will be the end of dining out as we know it, unless people wake up and realize that this has to be stopped in its tracks. This article is from CNN. Restaurant and bar owners say social distancing could wipe out their industry, unsurprisingly. The US state of Georgia allowed restaurants to reopen on April 27th. The 3 owned by Ryan Pernice are still shuttered. The entrepreneur hasn't opened his restaurants. Table & Main, Osteria Matone, and Coalition Food and Beverage. Since March 16th, Pernice is worried about the health of his employees and customers. But there's another reason the restaurants are still shut down. They can't make a profit with social distancing rules in place. It's almost like that's the point, isn't it? So basically, all small to medium businesses won't be able to operate. Only massive corporations will survive. And in the future, it'll be a choice. Do you want to work for the government in the public sector? Or do you want to work for a massive multinational? There'll be nothing in between. If you talk to restaurants across the globe, the language might change, but the math is the same. Pernice told CNN Business, restaurants and bars need volume and traffic to make them work. Pernice has been forced to lay off or furlough 80 of his 120 staff. Around the world, millions more restaurant and bar workers have lost their jobs as countries impose strict lockdowns designed to contain the pandemic. To contain the pandemic or shut down those businesses? Some of those restrictions are now being eased, but restaurants and bars are not being prioritized for reopening because they are viewed as venues where the virus might spread. Restaurant owners and managers are grappling with the brutal math that underpins their industry. Margins are razor thin, forcing eateries and bars to pack in customers every night, and especially on the weekends, in order to stay afloat. In the toughest markets, that means multiple waves of guests and tables that are pushed together as closely as possible. It's a business model that is simply not compatible with social distancing. There will be no profits for us while we are social distancing, said Blaise Noack, another Georgia restaurateur who chose to reopen when restrictions were lifted last month. There are a great amount of restaurants that I've heard will never open again. Funny how mainstream media corporate offices everywhere, they're considered essential. They're not being shut down. It's interesting, isn't it? As unemployment rises to levels not previously seen in the last century, more and more people will fall into state support and welfare and eventual poverty, and people's health, mentally and physically, does not tend to do well in poverty. I've said this many times. The lockdown and social distancing will have a much greater impact on health than the virus ever did. The virus was always used as a Trojan horse for more control, to accelerate sustainable development goals, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and bring about mandatory vaccinations, more surveillance, and ultimately global communism. To bring about the fourth industrial revolution, first, the old world economy must be destroyed to make way for the new one. I found this video by Gulf State Analytics very interesting.
As the digital, physical and biological worlds continue fusing together against the backdrop of innovation in artificial intelligence, the world is experiencing the fourth industrial revolution.
I gotta say, it doesn't sound like a revolution I'm going to enjoy all that much.
Advanced wireless technologies, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, commercial drones and fintech all serve to open new areas for creativity, innovation, efficiency and economic growth.
I really don't like these autonomous vehicles. I want the freedom to drive my own car.
In fact, some experts estimate that up to 80% of existing jobs will be automated by the fourth industrial revolution.
By the fourth industrial revolution. She has an unusual way of finishing her sentences. Anyway, this is the problem, isn't it? What exactly happens to all of those people who are made redundant by machines? You're going to have mass unemployment, so how do they feed themselves? You see, this fourth industrial revolution sounds more and more like technology-enabled communism. This utopian notion that we'll all just have infinite amounts of resources because the machines will make all our food and clothing for us and we'll just have all this leisure time. It's never worked in the past, and I suspect it won't work in the future. I don't think humanity wants to live like zoo animals in smart cities, being fed scraps by AI overlords.
The impact of this transition will reach all countries of the world, bringing opportunities as well as major challenges that could threaten to unleash political, social, and economic instability.
Yeah, so why are we doing it again? Why are we trying to make human beings essentially obsolete?
The coronavirus pandemic, however, is hotwiring the fourth industrial revolution. The COVID-19 crisis will highlight how countries which began embracing next-generation technologies are set to adapt more easily to ongoing changes, as this disease represents a major paradigm shift.
It's a major paradigm shift. And here I was thinking it was just a virus that we had to do lockdown for a few weeks, shelter in place, flatten the curve, socially distance for a bit, and then we just go back to normal, right? After the vaccine or something. But apparently the whole world has to change for this virus. Human society is being catapulted into the fourth industrial revolution, and it's almost as if, well, a paranoid person might think that the virus has been some kind of excuse or a MacGuffin that is being used to usher in this new era for humanity.
As the pandemic rushes the world into the future of digitisation at a faster rate, the Gulf states are in a comparatively strong position to make this transition smoothly.
But why do we have to make this transition at all? I mean, why is it necessary? Why does the world have to be rushed into this new digitised future? Why can't the people decide to just go back to the way things were and live their lives the way they did before? You know, it's almost like certain vested interest groups wanted to change our societies and economies, and the virus is the means by which they begin to normalize an entirely new paradigm for humanity, to acclimatize us to the new normal and widespread changes to our social behavior. It's just interesting, isn't it? Here's an interesting article from CNN, actually. Our cities may never look the same again after the pandemic. From Auckland to Bogota, urban planners are already adapting our cities to lockdown. But will the changes last? And which more radical design proposals, be it sewer monitors or epidemic skyscrapers, will shape the post-pandemic city? Yet more talk about how things aren't going back to normal. For advocates of walkable, unpolluted and vehicle-free cities, the past few weeks have offered an unprecedented opportunity to test the ideas they have long lobbied for. Well, isn't it just so convenient that a global virus came along in order to help facilitate this unprecedented opportunity, given the lockdown and everything, and give such people a taste of the kind of walkable, unpolluted, and vehicle-free cities that they've long lobbied for? With COVID-19 lockdowns vastly reducing the use of roads and public transit systems, city authorities from Liverpool to Lima are taking advantage by closing streets to cars, opening others to bicycles, and widening sidewalks to help residents maintain the 6-foot distancing recommended by global health authorities. Czech firm Hua Architects has meanwhile proposed a gastro-safe zone, pictured top, which uses brightly coloured ground markings to encourage passers-by to keep their distance from al fresco diners. And in Milan, one of the cities worst hit by COVID-19, designer Antonio Lanzillo has envisaged public benches equipped with plexiglass shield dividers. Here's some examples. Unreal. So looks like cities are going to become even more impersonal places. Less social trust, more fear and anxiety about a disease, by the way, which once again is no more deadly than the seasonal influenza. But let's just go ahead and change absolutely everything anyway. And look at this photograph. I mean, they're at a socially distant table, right? This guy's drinking coffee while wearing a mask, of course. That makes logical sense. Does anyone else think that the future is basically City 17 from Half-Life 2? Other ideas have ranged from self-disinfecting smart elevators to door handles that can be easily operated with elbows rather than hands. It is too soon to know which, if any, may be realized, but each idea suggests that the practice of social distancing and unease over shared surfaces could continue long after the current crisis. And that has been my biggest worry in all of this. If they do, the widely publicised 6-foot distancing guidelines could redefine the layout and spacing of new public facilities, according to Northwestern University's Sarah Jensen-Carr, whose forthcoming book, The Topography of Wellness, considers how urban landscapes have been transformed by epidemics like cholera, tuberculosis and obesity. So 6 foot could be the new unit we use when we think about cities and public parks. The caption on this photo says it all. A desire to distance ourselves from others in public may continue long after the pandemic. This next clip is from Eyewitness News ABC 7 New York.
Now, another popular spot, Domino Park in Williamsburg, where they've taken the added measure of actually drawing circles 6 feet apart so that people who come to the park can stay within a safe zone. That being painted there on the artificial grass there in Domino Park.
Would you really want to live like this? I mean, this is like a parody, but it's real life. You're going out trying to be genuinely social and amongst other people while sitting within designated social distancing circles, what are effectively dehumanizing parking spaces for human beings. These spaces are not designed to be temporary. Think of the widespread and truly disturbing changes that the social engineers have brought about in just a few weeks that have fundamentally upended our society and potentially permanently modified foundational aspects of human behavior. We're a tactile, physical and social animal that evolved to herd together in groups, thus creating social bonds of trust while also spreading healthy bacteria, germs and shared viruses that help to promote a healthy immune system. All of this is now gone, or potentially illegal, it seems. And to make matters worse, I'm beginning to suspect that what we're seeing is a cultural change, and that's a different thing, because now, I could be wrong about this, but I'm getting increasingly concerned that the longer this goes on, the more it becomes a cultural norm, which is to say, the wearing of masks, gloves, obsessive hand washing, social distancing, etc., that they've become arbitrary behaviors and rituals that are simply how people behave now, in the same way that, for example, Islamic countries have social norms as well as modesty clothing rules for women. In other words, on a certain level, the conversation about social distancing from a scientific perspective is over. It doesn't matter that scientists come out and explain to people that social distancing or wearing masks does more harm than good, because the culture has changed to adopt these new behaviors and rituals, not because of the pseudoscience that introduced them, but because of the power of the propaganda behind them. Here's another video from Reuters. The title is, German Schools Reopen to New Normal. New normal, right? Now, why is it that the media, experts and politicians keep repeating that phrase, new normal, over and over again? It's almost like they're trying to tell the public that all of these changes, as a result of the virus and social distancing, are here to stay permanently. Like this whole virus was an excuse to see how much fear was required to make the populace come to heel and radically alter their behavior, and also to further the plans of the elites for a new social paradigm. So again, with the happy, quirky, upbeat, rom-com type music. People queuing up outside. Well, you better get used to that, folks. Queuing is now going to be part of our lives in places where it was never previously required. People used to be able to just walk straight into shops, restaurants, bars, schools, all kinds of public buildings. Not anymore. Now your life is filled with needless complexity, obstacles, control measures, and systems that isolate you and separate you from other people, while also keeping you fearful and distrustful of strangers and human contact. What a great new world. So much joy and love, right? It's not at all massively depressing and demoralizing or anything. And what's with the music? Is this supposed to be fun or something? So the classes have to be all changed, and everyone is now sitting a good distance apart from each other, separated by tape. But it's like the kind of tape you'd see during a roadside construction or maintenance or something. First of all, we reduced the number of students in one group. Yeah, this is going to be really efficient and economically viable, isn't it? Well, all of that standing outside, I sure hope it never rains ever. So, what do you think is going to happen here? Well, I'll tell you what I think. We keep hearing about how remote learning is going to be a big thing in the future. So, it's likely that this situation is just going to be so crap that eventually online classes will become the new norm. I want to say that Bill Gates and the plans of vaccine companies to introduce their mandatory vaccines for their reasons, that's only one small part of the story. It might be easy to overfocus on just the fight against mandatory vaccines, while also neglecting the tyranny of social distancing, widespread population surveillance, the introduction of a social credit system, draconian lockdowns, a cashless society, contact tracing, and more. Ultimately, the COVID-19 crisis and the societal control measures and infringements upon individual civil liberties and freedoms sit within the greater plans of the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. Also, I'm seeing more stories like this. This is from New Zealand, from the New Zealand Herald. COVID-19 coronavirus. Controversial bill passed to enforce Alert Level 2 powers. A bill giving police sweeping powers to potentially enter homes without warrants while enforcing COVID-19 alert level rules has passed. The COVID-19 Public Health Response Bill was rushed through Parliament in time for Alert Level 2, but came under intense scrutiny from the opposition. It passed 63 votes in favour with 57 against. The National Party and ACT didn't support the bill, saying it was an overreach of powers, distrusted New Zealanders, and didn't allow for orders to have proper scrutiny. So, personal property and privacy rights now seem to mean very little in the midst of this crisis. Here's an article from itv.com in the UK. Take a look. First images released of social distancing markings to be used in Birmingham. Images have been released showing what one of the first pavement markings and signage schemes is to be used in the country could look like. The markings are designed to guide the public on how to follow social distancing and are to be launched on Broad Street in Birmingham. Two-way markings stretching 100 metres are to be laid from the junctions of Gas Street and all along Broad Street to Berkeley Street. Social distancing is just complete control of all human behaviour in public. So to wrap up this long-winded video, it's weird. In order to bring about the kind of world that the oligarchs clearly want of top-down control, well, they would need a lot more control of the populace, and wouldn't you know it, COVID-19 happened right at the start of this new decade, and it seems to be the perfect opportunity to bring about all these social changes that are useful in accelerating plans for this new world that no one in the public wanted or voted for. Ultimately, the future is not written. Well, okay, technically, the people behind these ghastly New World Order plans have written the future from their perspective in documents and manifestos and propaganda briefings. But in truth, they can't actually make it happen without our consent. And every small act of defiance, every time you don't stand on the stupid circle in the grocery store, or you walk back the other way that you're not supposed to down the aisle, or you refuse to wear a mask, every hug that you have in public, every handshake, every time people attend their places of worship when they're told that they're not supposed to, every time they gather on the streets in groups, it all shows that they do not own us and they cannot control us. Just trying to live a normal and authentic life and going about our day unencumbered is now running the risk of arrest or some kind of criminal prosecution. But I have faith in the genuine scientists, truth-tellers, and the increasing number of legal professionals now looking into this and opening public inquiries as to what is actually going on here. The problem for the global oligarchs and nut-bar psychopath control freaks seeking to bring about the New World Order is that they can only do so by constructing a house of cards. Their plans are so elaborate and interconnected that ripping away one thread, one piece of the puzzle, will dismantle the entire thing. We still have an opportunity to reach hearts and minds, and so long as there is hope, we must continue to dust ourselves off every day, get back up on the horse, and try to continue to fight for the truth with everything we have until the very end. So long as we can still do that, then they haven't defeated us. Thank you very much for watching this extremely long video. Anyway, as this is an exclusive BitChute video, please share this far and wide to reach as many people as possible. And by the way, another video of mine was removed on YouTube. My video commenting on the removal of the Dolores Cahill interview was also removed. Unbelievable, that's 2 videos removed in the space of a week. But that's YouTube. Thank God for BitChute. We'll continue to fight the good fight for free speech on this platform. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.